Watercolours with Caroline. Today we are going to paint a white cottage by the ocean, and I'm starting with the sky by wetting the entire sky area, and then I'm going to use Cerulean Blue to paint the sky, leaving quite a lot of white cloud. Now you can also use Phthalo blue if you want a more dramatic sky, a more intense blue, but if you're using Phthalo blue you have to be very careful not to go too dark or it will really overtake your whole painting. There's also another way I can do the sky, which is to add raw sienna near the horizon and then some permanent rose and let that look like a sort of a sunny sunset or a sunrise with some pink and some yellow in the sky. Now I'm putting some raw sienna on the sand, very tiny little bit of sand showing, but that still gives the impression of it being a cottage by the beach, and not too dark, just a very light raw sienna. Now this is what the sky looks like with the raw sienna and rose in it. So just to show you, I did two paintings and I'm going to dry that before I move on. Now the foreground is going to be very bright, wet and wet, impressionistic, and I want to use my big mop brush so I don't get too tight with this colour, and I'm wetting the entire area. And I also have a spray bottle to hand so I can blend the colours more. I'm using Azo Yellow, a nice bright transparent yellow, but you can use cadmium yellow, you can use Winsor yellow. Make sure it's lovely and bright. And I also am just going to add some gamboge to brighten it up. If you don't have gamboge, you could use a cadmium orange or mix the cadmium orange with a little bit of yellow to keep it light. You could mix an orange with some rose and yellow. It's just to keep a lovely bright foreground. I'm tipping it a little bit so that the colours blend, and I'm wiping up the water. I don't want the water to back run and make blossoms into the paint. And now this is still wet, and I'm going to add some rose, some burnt sienna, and different colours there in the foreground. And still wet, I'm going to add some Dioxazine purple violet. A little bit tricky because if it mixes too much with the yellow it will go grey, but it should be fine because I don't mind having a few little grey shadows. And I'm going into my Phthalo blue, putting that beside the violet, and I'm going to spread it out a little bit. As it mixes with the yellow it will make a greenish colour, which is what I want. Tipping a little bit more. Now you don't want this to be just a streak down the middle. This needs to sort of blend into your painting, into your composition. So now I'm taking that Phthalo blue, probably with a little bit of violet in it, and I'm mixing it to make some sort of bushes around the house, some greenery. A little bit of violet to make shadows. And especially there's a white fence that I have masked out with masking fluid. I'm going with the violet and a little bit of Phthalo blue in the doorway. I will darken that up later, but right now it's going to have some lovely vibrant shadows. I have masked out some weeds in the foreground, the cow parsley I think it's called, and I've masked that out with masking fluid, so that will be white at the end of the composition when I erase the masking fluid. So I want to have a little bit of shadow behind the white so it shows up, so I would streak a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue behind the masking fluid so it will show up when I take it off at the end. And I need to remember that with the fence too. I will have to have some greenery and some shading behind the fence so that that will show up. And that's what I'm adding here. Now to make a beautiful bright yellow, I have mixed the Phthalo blue with the Azo Yellow, and I'm making those bushes a little bit more green, nice bright spring green. And I am dulling that green down a little bit with some violet. Make it a nice dark green, but then if I use the same colours for all of these mixes, everything hangs together as a composition. A little bit more yellow now, same Azo Yellow, just using the same three colours, the Phthalo blue, the Azo Yellow and the Dioxazine purple, Dioxazine violet. I have to remember which one that is, I have to look it up. And Now I'm going to flick with a very small brush. I'm going to flick against the fence to flick some grasses, long grasses there. Now the sky is dry and the sand is dry, so I am using Cobalt Teal to put in the ocean. If you don't have Cobalt Teal, you can use Cerulean Blue. You could mix a little yellow with the Cerulean Blue to make it a more greenish blue if you like. This is just the first layer anyway, because when this is dry, I will come back with some ultramarine, or you could use some cobalt blue to paint some shadows and waves on the ocean. Now I'm tackling the roof, and I want to put in some Cerulean Blue first for some light grey, and then I mixed a very dark grey using Prussian Blue and Ultramarine, Burnt Sienna and Rose, and very heavy on the blue so that it's I don't want a brown roof, I want it to be a nice dark grey. And if you don't have the Prussian or don't have the Phthalo blue, a nice cool blue, but they're pretty interchangeable for the grey. You could use Prussian or you could use Phthalo. And you want to make sure you've got plenty of ultramarine in there, so it is a lovely grey colour. And I would like a little bit of the cerulean showing, but I am going to blend it in well with the grey. It's just meant to be a sort of a highlight of the grey roof. And while I have that dark grey colour, I will put in the edge of the roof and the edges of the chimneys, the roof on the porch, and the windows in the front of the cottage to define those. I'm keeping it really, really simple, leaving out a lot of detail that you might see on a cottage. This is not meant to be a realistic painting, it's not meant to be detailed. It's meant to celebrate the beautiful colours that you're using in the painting, especially the complementaries of the violet and the yellow and the blue and the orange, which make it glow. I'm still blending in. I don't want that cerulean too light. I just want it to be like a bit of a highlight in the grey. I'm very carefully painting in the window panes. Now you could use your masking fluid for this, but I find masking fluid clumps up and you don't get very straight lines with it. You can't get that lovely sharp straight line. It's easier to just paint it with a brush. And I'm going to lift a little bit of that dark from the window as if it's reflecting, the glass is reflecting light. And straighten up that roof, and a little bit more dark in the doorway. And we're not going to worry if there's a door there or if it's open, or it's just shadow in the doorway. I have pure burnt sienna to paint the chimney pots, like a terracotta chimney pot. Very, very simple with these. We don't want to go into a lot of detail. And while I have that burnt sienna on my palette, I'm going to use my thin rigger brush to flick the burnt sienna and some green up from the foreground to make some grasses with those weeds. Now I need to shade part of the cottage, and you don't want the dark grey for this, you want a very light grey, so I've mixed some cobalt blue and raw sienna and rose to make a very light grey for the shadow on the front of the cottage. And it's meant to be in bright sunlight, and we could go dark with the shadow, but I didn't want to. I wanted to keep this cottage looking lovely and bright as the focal point of the painting. And also because I had quite a lot of blue in front of it, I wanted that grey to be a more raw sienna grey. Now I'm using a very diluted ultramarine to put in some darker ocean waves particularly at the horizon, so that the horizon really stands out. And then I come forward to make some waves, leaving the cobalt teal showing. And I use a wet brush to blend that in. And I'm using the same ultramarine to make some shadows from the fence. I have a little white fence there and on the other side. Shadows are so important. They tell you that there is sunlight. And I've mixed a lovely dark green using the phthalo blue And the ultramarine, the Azo Yellow and the D-violet. The D-violet really darkens the green up and makes it very colourful and intense. And I want to add some dark greenery behind that white fence so that it really shows up. Now I want two trees at the edge of the painting, 2 fir trees. And I've used burnt sienna, dioxazine violet and ultramarine blue, mostly burnt sienna for the tree trunks. And I have a dagger brush, number 4 dagger brush, to get those nice straight lines for the tree trunks. And I can use the same brush, it has a lovely thin point, to put in the branches before I put the fir needles on. And I looked out the window into my backyard. I have quite a few fir trees in the backyard, just to make sure I got the angle of the branches correct for that type of tree. And also, while I have that colour on my brush, I'm going to add some shadows around the house and some more grasses. It's a lovely brush for doing grass and weeds. I'm mixing a very dark green, again using the Azo Yellow and the Phthalo Blue, Ultramarine and the Dioxazine Purple. And as the fir needles come out into the sunlight, I put extra yellow in the mix. And then when I want them in the shadow, I put more violet in the mix. And that really helps to give it a realistic look, although it's impressionistic. But you want your greens to be different where they're in sunlight and where they're in shade. I still have some of that green on my brush, so I'm going to add some more grasses. So there's lots of different colour grasses in the front. You've got the purple and the burnt sienna and now some green. And later I'll be painting the teasels and there'll be some blue, dark blue. And what I didn't do at the end of this one, but I did at the other one, was I covered up the cottage with some plain paper and I splattered some of these bright colours in the foreground. I might do that before I finish. Now I have some cobalt blue and I'm adding some more shadow under the roof and under the overhang, under the window. Because remember, the shadows tell you that there is sunlight. I've mixed the D-violet and the Phthalo Blue and sometimes a little bit of burnt sienna or a little bit of permanent rose, and I'm painting those teasels. I don't want them to be all the same colour, so I will dip in one or other of the mixes every time I dip my brush, so I have a lovely variety of colours, but they're still dark and intense, so that those teasels really show up in the foreground. And if you're not sure what a teasel looks like, I just go to Google Images and I find myself a simple little line drawing or picture, black and white picture, and that helps me. Now, I want a few little flowers around the cottage, but I don't want to overdo it, so I've got a little bit of permanent rose and I've just dotted a few flower shapes coming out of the greenery, maybe a little bit of orange on the side. And again, don't overdo something like that, it will look too false. Just a little tiny bit gives an impression that there might be flowers there. And if there is sunlight, there will be some blue shadows behind that greenery and from the tree trunks. And there will also be shadows from the tree trunks along the grass. And my last step is to erase the masking fluid from the cow parsley and the white fence. And I just want to put on the fence some shadows on the side of the fence post that's not facing the sun. That helps to define them. And sharpen them up a little bit. And add a little bit more in the way of shadows. And then it's finished.